Hello and welcome to my review of The Coffee Thief by William Smits, who has a YouTube channel of his own, and you can find it at this address. The Coffee Thief was published in 2022 in Jakarta, and Smits himself is of Dutch-Indonesian descent. This is an alternative history book, and the rather earnest author's note is kind of vague about the difference, saying there was a point of departure from real-world history in Indonesia sometime after the Second World War. But my knowledge of Indonesia is negligible. Compare that to something like The Man in the High Castle. American history is rather more famous, but the departure point is also more specific. The paratext also promises that in reading the novel I'm going to learn much about the local geography, nature and culture. And I think that that's probably something of an overstatement, although it did certainly pique my interest. Antonius, our protagonist and first-person narrator, is an Indonesian worker who picks coffee beans on a plantation. The conditions and pay make this border on slavery. He witnesses a young woman being raped by one of the Dutch overseers, but does not interfere because he's afraid of reprisals. The next day, he's called in to see the head of the plantation and accused of spreading material in support of rebellion. His accuser is none other than Amalia, the girl whose rape he witnessed. She uses her accusation to get close enough to the overseer and kill him. She tries to kill Antonius as well, but her gun jams and she flees. Antonius ends up on trial for the murder, and his story of disappearing murderesses is not believed. His lawyer, however, tracks down contacts of the girl, and against all odds, Antonius is acquitted. Unfortunately, he is convicted of a lesser crime, stealing coffee from the plantation. The punishment for this is 3 years' labour in a sulphur mine. This is a foul place and incredibly dangerous, and after just a few weeks, Antonius's health is already failing. With another prisoner, Danny, he discusses an escape, and an earthquake immediately gives them the opportunity. They are separated in the attempt, and Antonius heads towards distant mountains, thinking a rumoured band of rebels will offer sanctuary. Eventually he finds them, and he discovers that Amalia is alive and well in the same rebel camp. The action skips forward 6 months, and Amalia and Antonius have put aside their differences and built a relationship. Things in the camp are very routine until Rose arrives. She's an Australian journalist and warns them that the government knows their location. They decide to decamp, take a boat to the island and set up a new life there. With the police looking for them and the ship's captain being slightly suspicious at first, and with rough seas promised, the journey is likely to be dangerous. In terms of plot, the first third to the end of the trial has a really nice flow. The escape from the sulphur mine is kind of abrupt and a shame, because circumstances in the prison had promised both a change of pace and tone, and potentially even a comparison between the drudgery of plantation work and the prison slavery. Danny is in and out so fast, and his frailty made so much of, that his later appearance in the rebel camp is initially very suspicious, an idea that is then not utilised much, like the man himself. Antonius' insistence that he will miss his comradeship when the rebels split into 2 groups seems a little odd, given how little they've been shown together. Likewise, the skipping of 6 months means, as readers, we miss the majority of the development of Amalia and Antonius' relationship, which again is a shame. Though in truth, I've no idea how he would write such a thing. The awkwardness of the transition from rape witness to lover isn't as toxic here as the similar events portrayed in Heinlein's Friday, for example, and that can only be a good thing, as is the fact that all of these things are things I'd like to see more of, not less of. This is also true of the rebels, who don't do as much rebelling as they might have. Smits instead focuses on Antonius' skills as an outdoorsman as he travels to the rebels, and his clear passion and skill for such things translates quite nicely from the page. The book is 170 pages long, though, maybe 170 pages short, but it wouldn't surprise me if the word count was lower than typical across those pages as well. It seems like it would be readable in a single setting, and my biggest complaint, which is likely not a good choice of words, would be that there should be so much more of it. As a protagonist, Antonius is easy to root for. He's very much the oppressed everyman, suffering through injustice even before his time in the prison camp. His failure to act in defence of Amalia is understandable in the circumstances, but also sets him up as somebody that can grow and develop into somebody a bit stronger, a bit more. His deference to and cruel treatment by the authorities sets him up as a decent man against insurmountable odds. I think the part of the novel Smits enjoyed writing the most are those drawing on his grandfather's tutoring. Antonius shows off his skills as a frontiersman. The flip side to this is that he has so much fun, it seems like Antonius is as well, making his plight less desperate than it might have been. I kept collecting more dry wood for the fire during the night, while seeing the foam appear on top of the bamboo tubes. Not long now, during this busy afternoon, I even had found time to make a small table to put my meal on. The double exclamation mark and the creation of this unnecessary extravagance take away from the desperation of his trek into an uncertain future, which would be fine, but Smits tells us that Antonius can't go around a town swarming with guards due to his ailing strength. So it's slightly incongruous there, I think. It's an engaging enough section, and Smits' enthusiasm for the outdoors is well expressed, but I'm not completely convinced that the tone is 100% ideal for the story in that section. I'd compare it with something like Gerald Seymour's Archangel, in which the protagonist escapes a Siberian prison camp only for his long journey to safety to be equally tough and dangerous. As mentioned, Antonius does develop and grow somewhat into a more influential figure in the band of rebels, a gradual process, again, that I would have liked to have seen a lot more of. But the rebels' general inactivity doesn't allow this to be the kind of story where he rises through the ranks, or even that they'd achieve much, even as a token victory. Additionally, it is nice to see a depiction of somebody whose faith doesn't turn them into a raving bigot or psycho. Instead, Antonius believes that it will make him closer to other Christians, even through a language barrier. This is not something that you will see much of in Western novels these days. Antonius definitely narrates in a distinct and idiosyncratic style. In an example like this one, I'd personally try to avoid that repetition. As midday approached, we could see dry land in the distance. As the minutes passed, we could see the rocky cliffs that were like a fortress barrier protecting the island. Behind the rocks, we could see a coconut grove. But the repetition or doubling of the time adverbials here is more likely to be cultural and part of his voice, because there are other examples in the text of this, or sentences with doubled prepositions, for example. There are examples too of prepositions in unusual places like this one. Still, my entire lower half of my body got wet as I crossed slowly and methodically, clinging to rocks to keep from being swept away to any waterfall downstream by the fast-flowing water. Where more formally and for clarity you might expect to put the prepositional phrase nearer the relevant verb, such as in this example, or it might just be better to trim out one of those prepositions. But the voice is consistent throughout, which is a definite positive. The only other character to contribute significantly to the narrative is the Australian journalist Rose, whose dialogue rarely sounds like something a human would say, as she's usually tasked with dumping the information required to move the story forward. Call me Rose. I'm a journalist for a newspaper in Australia. I've heard about rebel activity in this area. It took me a huge effort to learn your language and then to come here so that I could ask questions for my article and a book I'm writing. Her Malay did not sound like the way the Dutch spoke our language. But despite the thrice filtered voice here, Rose hurriedly learning Malay, Antonius remarking on and presumably altering her speech, and of course our author doing the same to meet his own requirements of plot and character, though Rose's long sentence here is similar to some examples by Antonius here and in other places. We still get the feeling of two distinct voices, which is important when these two characters do the bulk of the conversing in the novel. In conclusion, this is such a short novel that even doubled in length, it would not be an off-putting size. That would allow Smits to really explore our characters in more depth, especially people like Amalia, who feels rather like a MacGuffin in the second part of the text after promising so much more in the first, and Danny, who is underused in both. I would love to have seen more focus. There is enough here for 3 books, and it's all powered through so quickly that somebody like Danny could have been used to create tension and suspicion, but instead barely plans his escape before it's executed. By cutting the middle 6 months out, we lose key parts of Amalia's relationship with Antonius. That said, the text is simply packed with incident and event, and at a scant 170 pages is not likely to be considered boring. It shines the first hint of light on a piece of colonialism that is not especially well known and also has an engaging narrator. If you have a few pounds and a couple of hours spare and you want to support a new voice from a different part of the world, you could do a lot worse than support the coffee thief.
Has anybody seen my umbrella? Last time I saw it, it was hanging out the back of something quite unpleasant.
Back Sexton Lovecraft on Indiegogo.
You know what we need here? We need a queue.